Well, thank you, everybody. I guess we're ready to get started. Warren, are we ready?
Right.
I just want to thank everybody for coming today. My name is Tim Mowry, and I'm president of the Bethel Park Historical Society. On behalf of the Historical Society, which owns this building, the Schoolhouse Arts and History Center, we really appreciate you coming today. This is the first in what we hope to be a long series of educational, whether it's history or it's just general educational topics that we plan on working and having a speaker series. We have one planned this fall for the 60th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination, where he's going to talk about the assassination itself. We're working with the Allegheny Land Trust. We'll be having a series starting this fall. Like I said, it's going to be focused on history, but it's also going to be focused on what this building was originally built for, and it's education. So this is the first where we're going to, few bumps in the road, but we're going to get through it. But I would like to introduce our first speaker, Warren Merritt, who is to talk about the history of coal in the area. And Warren started at Consol Coal, and I think there's many Consol alum here today. So I first met him when he volunteered. He probably regrets this when he came in, and he said, I have some old maps for you, the coal mines in the area. And we have a little coal mining museum. We have some of the things over on the table that were donated within the last 7 years from the local mines. As everybody knows, Bethel Park was really founded between the Coverdale and the Molinar mines. But he brought these maps in. We had a couple projects. Anytime we had a problem or a question, unfortunately, he gave me his email and phone number.
Free.
Yes. Gratis. We like that. That's why I remembered it. But he was always there to help, and we brought this subject up since it was such an important topic for the history of our community. I asked him if he would be willing to speak and talk a little bit about it. So at this time, you didn't come to hear me. Our guest speaker, Warren Merritt.
Thank you, Tim. Don't clap until I'm done. So if I do good, then you can clap. So no, thanks, Tim, and thanks Bethel Park Historical Society for roping me in. Inviting me to do this. I started probably in November, working on it kind of part-time. And right off the bat, I'm not a historian, so it looked good on the Facebook page, but I'm an engineer. This is more like an engineering evaluation of what happened to Bethel Park. Since I retired in 2016, I thought I was going to relax and enjoy myself and play more hockey with these two guys here, and that didn't happen. I started getting calls from ex-Consol employees who had moved to other companies, and they were having issues with their consultants, couldn't figure out what was going on with the underground coal mines under their projects. Home development, property development, oil and gas, pipelines, and other coal companies. So I've been doing some consulting ever since, so it's a lot of fun. So we'll start off with where is Bethel Park in the world of coal. So I'll try we got my new digital pointer here. So we're in the northern Appalachia Basin. The Appalachian Basin strings all the way down to Alabama. There's also the Illinois Basin. Then you've got mines out in Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico. And then up in Wyoming, you got Powder River Basin. There's about 250 billion tons of coal reserves in the United States. And last year, the coal production had dropped off to about 500 million. So technically, you got 500 years worth of coal left, assuming everybody's going to use coal going forward. And in Pennsylvania, Bethel Park's right here in the main bituminous field. The bituminous field, it's a high vol, and vols are, this man can explain it to you, they're like moisture and gases and stuff that comes off when you heat it. And as you get closer to the mountain range, the vols start to drop off. And when you get over on the eastern Pennsylvania, it's anthracite coal, and basically all the vols have been driven off. Okay, so the primary seam under Bethel Park and this whole area, and probably the most prolific and most economically important seam in the United States, was the Pittsburgh seam. A couple things of interest, we're right here. The seam is fairly uniform thick. It's probably 6 foot here. It thickens as you head south into West Virginia, 7, 8 foot. It thins as you head over into Ohio, and it thins as you head to the south. But to the east and to the north, it stays 6, 7 foot thick. What you're seeing in red is the areas that were mined out, and in gray it was the reserves that were remaining. And if you go over here to Frostburg, Maryland, you'll see that's where Consolidation Coal Company started in 1864, mining the Pittsburgh seam. So between here and here, all that Pittsburgh seam has been eroded by, water. And same up here. And as you head north, you get up to about Moraine State Park, and the Pittsburgh seam was eroded by glaciers. So what's really interesting about this map to me is all the coal that's not there anymore. And we don't know how big this basin was. It could have gone all the way up into New York, all the way over into eastern Pennsylvania. The anthracite coal could actually be Pittsburgh coal that was caught up in the mountain building process. And there's actually meta-anthracite in Rhode Island. And who knows, the basin could have been that big. So what's going on in Bethel Park? This is a USGS quadrangle map. It basically shows streets and streams and buildings. And you can see here's the mall, here's the industrial park right there. And then here it is on Google Earth, same thing. Bethel Park splits them all in two. Here's the industrial park. Okay, and then you add in the outcrop. And outcrop is basically where the coal seam intersects the surface. So you can actually, instead of putting a shaft down, you can go straight in the hillside and mining. And there is no outcrop coal in Bethel Park. There is in South Park, and there is as you head over into Bridgeville and up into Castle Shannon. This whole coal seam, not only it plunges to the south, so as it goes south, it gets deeper, and it rises to the north, and that's where it outcrops in the north. Okay, so what's going on with the coal underneath Bethel Park? This is a bottom of coal map, or it's a coal structure map. One thing you notice right away is the coal's not flat. It was originally laid down horizontally, but over the next 300 million years, continents were drifting around, banging into each other, mountains were being built, and this coal ended up being kind of smushed up against the back of the Allegheny Mountains, and it started undulating in waves. So you get these valleys and you get these little hilltops. The valleys are called synclines, the hills are called anticlines geologically. So what I did is I took the data off a 1935 mining map, the bottom of coal data. I digitized it, I created a grid. A grid is just a series of X, Y, Z's that you populate across there, and it mathematically calculates what that elevation should be at that point. And then I colored the grid and I recontoured it, and what you see is in Bethel Park is this valley coming through here called the McMurray Syncline, and it rises as you head back towards South Park, and it rises as you head to the north toward Castle Shannon and Mount Lebanon. And then it does some weird stuff over here on the border with Upper St. Clair. So we've been in enough coal mines to know it's hardly ever flat, and it usually does some weird undulations. The good thing for Bethel Park about this is when the mines are done and they filled up with water, all the water is draining out of here and going to Peters. And eventually it runs over to North Strabane, and it's pumped out. If you drive on West McMurray Road and go by Hahn, there's two big ponds there, and they pump the water out there and treat it, and they have to keep the water elevation down below a certain level, otherwise it's going to pop up uncontrolled in Chartiers Creek over near South Point. Okay, so now we know what the bottom of coal looks like. So this is what the surface looks like, and this data is readily available out on Allegheny County's website. It's in GIS format. So I just grabbed all that. I did the same thing. I gridded it, I contoured it, and then you can see right away that the highest spot in Bethel Park is underneath those two water tanks on McMurray Road as you head into Peters on the east side. And then the lowest spot is actually over here where Library Road hits Clifton. That's the lowest spot elevation-wise. But you can also see the deeply incised creeks. This is Clifton Road, and I think that's Piney Fork. And then over here, you can see McLaughlin Run, and up on top Painter's Run, and then right up here where Molinar is the headwaters for Sawmill Run Creek. Over here in South Park, that is called, I think it's Catfish Run. People call it Sleepy Hollow, but I think the stream's actually called Catfish Run. I doubt if there's been any catfish in there for a long time. So now I got the topo, got the topography, I gridded it, and so I subtracted the two, and then I recontoured them, and it basically gives me a depth map to the coal seam. And right away you can see that of course the thickest or the deepest to the coal seam is underneath those two water tanks, and then the shallowest is right here on where Clifton, right by the BP station there. It's 90 feet down to the coal seam. So that's what's going on with the coal. And now it's math time. I'm an engineer, there's going to be math involved, so you just got to get used to it. So all you need to solve these equations is you have to remember that there's 640 acres in a square mile, 43,560 square feet in an acre. The density of water is 62.4, and coal is 1.4 specific gravity. Given that, you can calculate all this. But what it shows is there's about 81 million tons underneath Bethel Park before they started mining. And if you look at, I hit that twice, didn't I? Let me get back to my dot. Okay. So there is 84 acres down here where under the low cover that nobody mined, theoretically. That's what the maps show. It doesn't mean somebody didn't sneak out there and get something. But so there's about 1 million tons in that 84 acres. So you have about 80 million raw tons in the ground before anybody started mining. You assume about 65% recovery, and that includes leaving some coal on the floor because there's fire clay underneath. It gets wet, it gets mushy, it's hard to mine. Plus leaving pillars and stumps and some roof coal. And then of the coal that comes out of the ground, you're going to throw 10% of it away. It's got high ash, it's too fine. Back then they didn't, anything that was really fine they just threw away because people couldn't use it. So you end up with about almost 47 million tons that was removed from the ground over almost 60 years of mining at Bethel Park. And the interesting thing about that is for a modern large longwall mine like Bailey's mine down in Washington, Greene County, that's less than 2 years of production. So, I mean, that's how much they can produce 25 to 30 million tons a year. So we put it in place. You got 60 years worth of mining versus a year and a half. Okay, so who mined this stuff and where did they get the rights? This is a 1890 Rainey's coal ownership map. It was updated in 1906, and right away the big thing that it shows is what happened in 1899. The captains of industry, the Olivers, the Fricks, the Mellons, decided they didn't want to mess around with hundreds of little coal companies, and they were all over the place. So what they did is they took 80 small coal companies and they smushed them together and made Pittsburgh Coal Company without the H, because it was 1899, and those were the mines that were served by the railroad. And they also took 90 small little coal companies, smushed them together, and formed Monongahela River Consolidated Coal and Coke. Okay, so those are the ones in the red, that runs up and down the Mon. And in 1903, Pittsburgh Coal Company got controlling interest of Monongahela River Consolidated Coal and Coke, and by 1916, it was completely gone and absorbed into Pittsburgh Coal Company. So all that red would have turned blue by 1916. The 1890 map would have been so many colors, they probably would run out of colors. There would be so many. So under Bethel Park, this is what that 1906 map looks like. And these are the original mineral tracks. And they were severed from the surface probably 30 or 40 years before that. So they look a lot like what the original surface owners had, the farm leases and stuff. So it shows Pittsburgh Coal Company controlled all of that coal, except for a couple white spots, which is going to be confusing because in a minute you're going to find out Pittsburgh Coal didn't start all those mines. There were another company involved. So these are the 7 mines that mined underneath Bethel Park. and they were basically owned by two companies, Pittsburgh Terminal Railroad and Coal Company, and Pittsburgh Coal Company. Now, I've got CONSOL listed on a couple of them because Pittsburgh Coal Company and CONSOL merged in 1945 to form Pittsburgh Consolidation Coal Company, and then 1958 they changed the back name to Consolidation Coal Company, and it later became CONSOL, and now it's CONSOL Energy. So it's still around after 150 or 60 years, but these mines actually started out as Pittsburgh. Harrison Mine actually started out as Pittsburgh and ended in Pittsburgh, because before the merger. So you got the Castle Shannon mine. The Pittsburgh terminal mines were numbered 1 through 8, and also A through H. So they were known as the alphabet mines. And then the two mines, number 3A, Molinar, and number 8, Coverdale, were the ones that had surface facilities in Bethel Park proper. The other ones had surface facilities outside. So they came in from the outside, mined under Bethel Park, and then went away. Okay, but that 1906 map showed it was all controlled by Pittsburgh Coal Company. So, and I was always confused about that until I got into this and started looking at it. So when you go to the 1902 mine inspectors reports, and all this stuff's out there. It's amazing, all the data you can find that's out there. And it announces that Pittsburgh Terminal Railroad Coal Company bought 13,600 acres of coal from Castle Shannon and Fairview all the way down to Piney Fork and Library. So then that was in 1901. And they put in 4 coal mines. So if you look at the coal mines, you got terminal number 1, 2, 3, and 6. 1 and 2 is Castle Shannon. 3 is Molinar. 4 is Horning. 5 is Curry. 6 is Broughton. 7 is Large. And 8 is Coverdale. So there's not going to be a test at the end, so you don't have to really know that. So they had the 4 running, and it shows that 2 of them had been running a while, and I'm pretty sure, and it doesn't really say this, the Castle Shannon Coal Company predated that by a couple decades. I'm pretty sure they brought the railroad down from Sawmill Run, and they put the coal mines in. So Pittsburgh Terminal bought Castle Shannon Coal Company and got all this property, plus they probably got some more. The interesting thing over here is in 1901 they only had 6 horses. And you can see how many horses there are in the 1900s. They had 1 fatality in their first year. And I'm not going to get into how dangerous mining was in 1900, but it was scary dangerous. So we'll go to 1903, and now we've got 1 through 5. 6 didn't produce any coal, and they're all producing, 100,000. But look over here, they've got like 100 horses now. So each mine had, 20 or 30 horses, and they hauled the carts underground to the shafts and everything. And 4 miners died that year. So every year you see that consistently. So 1903, Pittsburgh Terminal was still in charge of this. In 1905 report, all of a sudden, all those mines show up as A, B, C, D, E, but they're under Pittsburgh Coal Company. Okay, so somehow Pittsburgh Coal Company is now running every coal mine in the area. And you can see the production report. Here they are mixed in with the Pittsburgh Coal Company, Ocean, Midland, Fairhaven, and look at all those horses, 266 horses. Okay, so by 1909, the mines are back under Pittsburgh Terminal Coal Company. So for a period in there, the mine inspectors' reports are saying that it shifted from one company to the other and then shifted back. And here's the production report, 2 through 7. Here's why I think Castle Shannon predated that, because number 1 shut down pretty early on in Pittsburgh Terminals. So I'm thinking, and it's about the same size as number 2, so it'd been mining for quite a few years. Most of these mines need 25, maybe 30 years worth of production ahead of them to be able to afford to put the facility in, to get a rate of return on their investment. So If you go to the Pittsburgh Coal Company annual report for 1907, you see that November 1904, they leased all of Pittsburgh Terminal Coal Company's facilities and ran them for $350,000 a year, annual minimum payment. So that's when they started. And when they finished, because they were unprofitable, that the earliest they could get out of there was 5 years. They had a 5-year lease agreement that they couldn't get out of. They were losing money, and they turned it back to Pittsburgh Terminal, and that's why that map in 1906 shows everybody owned by Pittsburgh Coal Company, because that's the way it was. If you'd looked at any year before and after, it would have looked completely different. Okay, so 1925, this is what it looks like for Pittsburgh Terminal Coal Company. You got 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, and 8. Now 8 is Coverdale, and it started in 1920. So you can see that these mines are now, instead of producing 200,000 tons a year, they're like 7, 8, 900,000. It's big numbers. But also look, well, over here, nobody's counting horses anymore. So something changed between there, and then it was electricity and the use of electrical equipment underground. Things have changed, so nobody cares about horses. They were all put out to pasture. Pittsburgh Terminal Coal Corporation also had 2 mines in Washington County. Number 9 is just south of Avella. I know exactly where it was because it butted up against Windsor Coal Company and a couple things. And I have searched everywhere for number 10, and I have no clue where it is. I think it was small and short-lived, but I can't find a mine map, and I can't find any data about it. So. And Tim doesn't pay me enough to go out and continue looking for it. So here's what it looks like of who mined what. Pittsburgh, number 2, Castle Shannon, just clipped the top of Bethel Park. And Molinar, whose facilities were right here, they mined this green area, and they also mined up into Mount Lebanon a little bit. 4, Horning, mined this northeastern side. The biggest mine was number 8, Coverdale, and then 3 Pittsburgh mines, Pittsburgh Coal Company. Harrison actually came over from Beedling and mined over, and Montour 10 came from Library and mined over, and then Montour 4 came from Valley Brook and Lawrence and mined over that. Okay, so the first coal mine in Bethel Park was at the bottom of the shaft at Molinar in 1901. And then the last coal was down here along McMurray Road in 1960. And then they were retreating, they were heading back out. Everything else was somewhere in between. Okay, so where were the surface facilities? Of course, Molinar is right there where the Washington T Station is. And then Coverdale is where the industrial park is. Castle Shannon was up here, I think, by the Burger King, or I think there's a bar called The Coal Mine, and I actually think that's where the coal mine was, right behind it. Horning was over on the kind of the corner of Horning and Curry Hollow Road, and Harrison was over between McMillan Road and Robb Hollow Road, right there in that kind of bend in the road. Montour 4 was down here on Valley Brook, but their main facility was over in Lawrence. And then Montour 10 actually started up here by the Broughton Fire Department in 1890 and mined this half. And then when the Montour Railroad came through, they opened up Montour 10 in about 1920 or so. And they mined the rest of this and then over into Peters and in that way. Okay, so, how did I get these maps? How did I get these lines on the map? The mine maps, it's all about the mine maps for me. I go down in and really look in detail. And this is a summary map of Pittsburgh Terminal Coal Company. And it basically, you can see how those lines line up with the boundaries of each of those. And you can also see how this map looks like it's folded, it's got wet, it's crumpled. So they scan this whole thing in, and then they pick a couple points and they drop it on the globe to get it in the right coordinates. But it's all mushed up and stuff. So whether it really in that exact location and stuff, I usually have to go in and tweak it and move it around to get it to fit where I need. So that's the one map. Okay, here's the larger map, and this shows actually the surface facilities. In yellow was owned by Pittsburgh Terminal Coal Company, and in blue was owned by Pittsburgh Terminal Land Company. And it's interesting that the land company owned the property underneath the houses, and the coal company owned the property underneath the facilities. But you can see Molinar right here. They got a little piece underneath the town, and right next to it, back behind Sheets, underneath the Millennium Park, and you were mentioning something, you had to deal with them. Well, here's a big blob of property, surface property that Pittsburgh Terminal owned, I think underneath that tunnel. They must have owned a lot of the park at one time. Okay, so Castle Shannon is up here, 1 and 2. That's Coverdale. There's Horning. This is Curry, and Curry was weird. It's number 5, and from what I saw in the aerial photos and stuff, they ran a rail spur out there. They put a couple shafts down. They started mining coal, but they didn't last very long. They actually took those reserves. They shut the mine down. By 1939, when they just invented planes in the 20s or before that, so they started flying and taking aerial photos in the late 30s. The Department of Agriculture. That this was almost completely torn out. All the tracks were torn out, the shafts were closed, and now it's just like a wooded field between a bunch of houses, and nobody really knows it was ever a coal mine. This is across from the Broughton Fire Department. This is number 6 mine, and 7 mine is large. If you go down and drive down Piney Fork, just before you get to Large, where the old hotel used to be before it burned down, there's a big coal pile up on the side of the hill. That was the number 7 mine. Okay, so this is a 1935 map when I brought up, and I kind of got it to fit underneath Bethel Park with the same boundaries. And these maps were made by the CCC, or by the Workers' Progress Administration during the Depression. They hired a bunch of out-of-work mining engineers and geologists to map every coal mine in the state. And so each quadrangle has 9 sheets, and it also by seam. And they're out there. You can download them and look at them. They're really informative because it's kind of a snapshot of what happened in 1935 and before. And they're not 100%, but boy, it really comes in handy sometime. Okay, so I just took the Harrison mine. And actually, I went all the way over Chartiers Creek to see what was going on up Painter's Run, and it was pretty interesting. But these are actually probably 30. They're called K sheets, and the Pittsburgh Coal Company was not only a miner, but they were also a property owner, and they took really good care to track every ton they mined and what was going on. And you can take these sheets and clip them, and then piece them all together to form a mosaic, and that's what this represents. But you can see where they came over and they got into Bethel Park here. That is Molinar, where they stopped mining. Okay, this is a dump of polygons that you can get from the state. The state has digitized a lot of these mine maps with the same thing. They just digitize them, pick 3 points, drop them on there, and they're close. Some of them are close, but there's multiple polygons. And you can download these and do all kinds of stuff with them. So I just turned everything on to show you what's available. But it also shows that nobody mined this coal here. Well, yeah, they did. Nobody's digitized it, or nobody's found the mine map. Apparently, from what I heard, only 25% of the mine maps that were ever created are now in anybody's possession. So there's a lot missing. But nobody's gonna, if they're there, it looks like they were heading there at the time, they're gonna mine that out. So, okay, this is the interface to download mine maps or go look at mine maps. And I put a bunch of flyers over there, sheets, that have all the websites that you can go and look at your house and then look at all the mine maps under your house, or go look at your house and look at all the aerial photos that have been taken over your house. So they're really, really advantageous when you're doing mining work like that. But all these little pink polygons are available mine maps that you can actually look at. All you got to do is click on your house and it'll bring up this menu and you just say view map, view map, view map. So, okay, and this is those case sheets. Since Pittsburgh Coal Company didn't control this, which Pittsburgh Terminal, Coverdale and that, they didn't create any case sheets for there. But outside of that, these maps are amazingly detailed. They not only show you, what was mined and what wasn't mined, shows you what was on the surface, what the property control looked like, and little notes about who did what, and I've used those notes quite a few times. So we'll talk about the two facilities in Bethel Park proper, Molinar number 3, and I wondered where the name came from, and I found on the mine map there's a 70-acre mineral tract. It says Molinar Air 70 acre. So, and it's right next to the coal mine, and here's the town right here. So I'm thinking that, well, maybe that has something to do with it. And then on the 1890 Allegheny farm line map, there's also that same tract. It says Molinar, spelled O-U-R, instead of A, whatever it is. I'm an engineer, I can't spell. So we're pretty sure that Mr. Molinar either struck a deal with the coal company and said, I'll sell you my property if you name the coal mine after me or something. So, but I mean, if you look, there's a lot of Holtzes around here that own property all over the place, and it could have been named the Holtz mine, and if he had made the right deal. So, at least that's my story. I can't find anything better than that. So here's the photograph, and I think we've got that on the wall over here, of the Molinar 3 mine. And this is actually like you're standing on the T-tracks looking back toward the garage, the little service facility right on across from Milford. Yeah, that. So over here you've got the shaft, and they hoist up mine cars. And of course the horses are down below dragging the mine cars around. And they bring them up one at a time, and then they run them over and tip them upside down to get the coal out of them, and hence the name tipple. And you notice these are very, very flat. So there's not much, there's some sorting and some different size coal going in there, but there isn't a lot of anything else. The rock comes out the other end, and it goes up on the hillside in an aerial tram. There's not many pictures of that. So this is the hoist house and the powerhouse, and this is Library Road. It runs right and goes underneath one end of the tipple. Okay, so this is the property boundary. This is actually a property boundary of the Bethel Green Park. This is what Allegheny Land Trust and Bethel Park bought. Well, before, when it was for sale, a client had me do an investigation to see what was going on there. And the results of my investigation, they backed out of that deal so quick, it was unbelievable. And on the mine map, it shows you the property tracks. It's the railroads, the roads, shafts, and tipples. And the 1939 aerial photo shows the same thing. Here's the aerial tram. It goes up the hill from the tipple, which runs across. Railroad cars go underneath the tipple. It drops coal into each car. This is the empty side. This is the loaded side. So they bring empties in, they fill them up, and then they drop them down. And it's usually on a slope. It's all gravity. It's drop car load out. There's a production shaft right here. There's a ventilation shaft right here on the corner of Milford and, am I saying that right? Yeah, Milford and 88. Okay, and this is the refuse area. They take the refuse up to the top, and then they put it in little carts. I think they call them Larry carts, but it sounds like it should be lorry carts. But and they run them out on tracks and just end dump them over the hill. And they did this here. They did it at Coverdale. They did it about everywhere. Okay, so this is a LiDAR image of that same area. And LiDAR is like if you took a laser scanner and hooked it to the bottom of the airplane, it puts down thousands of laser points, and it sees through trees, and it allows you to take houses out. So what you're doing is, up in the woods there, you're seeing this big refuse pile. When I got here in '81, you drove down Connor Road, in the winter, you could see that refuse setting up on the hill, but it's grown up so much that even now, I drove down last week and I couldn't see it. But LiDAR is showing that there's about 300,000 or 400,000 cubic yards of material sent up on the hillside. And if you had to pay $20 a yard to get that out of there, you couldn't afford to build houses. I actually proposed that if you put townhouses that look like tomato soup cans, you know, they're overlooking Andy Warhol's grave on the other side. They didn't have a sense of humor. They didn't think it was. So, what's that?
How much coal is in that refuse?
Probably zero, because you go up there and it is, you know, this stuff spontaneously combusts, and most of that stuff's all burned up. So you find a few pieces of coal. I've walked that whole area, and it's really neat. If you want some exercise, go up there and walk around. Environmentally, the Bureau of Abandoned Mine Reclamation has looked at this site many, many times, and they have a project called Molinar on it. And if you can see who did request, and a bunch of the requests were from the trustee of Pittsburgh Terminal Coal Company wanting the state to come in and reclaim this for him so he could go sell it and do something with it. And each time they went out and looked, and there's no environmental issues there. There's no stream, there's no acid mine drainage, it's not on fire anymore, so it really doesn't impact the local environment, but it does make a nice park. The other thing is there's this weird flat area in the woods, and they flatten this out to do something, and I haven't figured out why. So, okay, so looking back at the mine map, I've highlighted the roads. Here's Library Road, Route 88, and here's Milford Road, and right here was the air shaft, and over here was the production shaft right next to the road, and it's in the parking lot of there's a depression right there, and it keeps kind of sinking in every so often. But right in there was a production shaft there. It's about 180 feet deep. So zooming in, you can see those facilities. Here's the tipple. Here's the aerial tramway. There was some kind of walkway over Library Road right here that went from one side to the other. The shaft was here. The hoist house was here. Air shaft was right there. And here's an old mine building here. So in 2004, from the mine maps also showed an electrical powerhouse sitting here. The shaft here was in the parking lot. Here's where the air shaft was, and here's the mine building. And there was another mine building back up across the railroad behind Sheets. So in 2004, that's what those buildings look like. They've since been, well, we'll find out what. But if you look, there's a common theme in here. You can see that the brickwork on these, they have these pilasters and then some fancy brickwork up on top. For some reason, they hired the same person to build all their buildings over decades, and they even went down and did some Pittsburgh Coal Company because that brickwork stands in a bunch of their buildings. So in 2010, you can see that they put a new roof on this air shaft building and a new roof here, and they really fixed up this one across the railroad tracks. There used to be like an auto junkyard right here, and it's been cleaned up. So in 2019, all of a sudden that mine building's gone, and there's a big Guardian storage there. So that's been removed, and a lot of people are over here working at this modified or remodeled mine building. So that's what the air shaft building looks like. It's been plastered over, so you don't see the fancy brickwork right here, and it has a flat roof. I don't know if it had a flat roof originally or not. I can't really tell, but you can see that these brickwork pilasters are all the way around, I guess to strengthen it up. And here's the building, same thing. You got the fancy brickwork on top, and this has been stylized or plastered over also. And that's all that's left at Molinar, all the buildings and so. Oh, except this, I forgot this. The electrical substation along the T line, there's an old building there. If you look, there's the brickwork, same thing. That was an old mine building. It looks like they're still using this side, definitely using this. That looks abandoned over here, so it doesn't look like anybody's doing anything with it. So those three buildings are the only ones that seem to be left. Okay, Coverdale, 1920 and closed in 1948, ran for 28 years. Interesting thing is it was supposedly named after William H. Coverdale, who was a president of Pittsburgh Terminal Coal Company, or president of the board. And I did a little quick research, and he was born in Kingston, Ontario. He was Canadian, and he died and he's buried in Kingston, Ontario. And he was president of 21 companies over his lifetime, mostly railroad, also the president of the Canadian Steamship one, and he was a consultant out of New York, worked for Pennsylvania Railroad too. So if you Google Coverdale and Coverdale Collection, he was big into antiques and it's stuff up in Canada as far as the colonial period. So he's done a lot of, there's the Coverdale Collection out there. So, okay, so this is what the mine was put in 1920, and it was put in after they built the Montour Railroad, same as Montour 10, which came through about 1915. And it came through and went, but no coal ever went down the Montour Railroad from Coverdale 8. It went up and hit Pittsburgh Terminal Railroad at Mifflin Junction, which is, I think, in Whitehall or Bethel Park on the main line. And they allowed them to use that track so they could take freight back down the Montour Railroad from that side. So here's the tipple, and here's the production shaft, and here's the hoist house, and there's no powerhouse because you don't need steam and stuff. It's all electric now. Interesting thing is this tipple looks a lot different than the other ones. The other tipples were 1-story, 2-story, and real flat. You had to push the coal out, and you had to tip the stuff over. Somebody realized that let's use gravity to our advantage, so they made them taller, and they also put 2 cars on each skip. And they locked the cars in so that when the skip hits the top of the shaft, it goes through a set of scrolls, and the skip dumps the coal out of the cars, and then it goes back down in the mine. So that was a big innovation right there. This was state-of-the-art coal mine, 1920, a lot of electrical. And then the coal would flow down and go through some screens and some chutes, and probably didn't have picking tables like the old ones with the boys there picking slate out and throwing it in another car. And in the end, it would come down, and there's 3 products it made. It would be 3 different size coals. And same 1920, it wasn't a preparation plant. There was no water involved. But slack coal was the really fine, like talcum powder type stuff. They couldn't sell it to anybody. It was thrown in the refuse area. Okay, so here's the hoist was a Vulcan hoist. This was out of 1923 coal age. And inside that building, this is what it looked like. You got a big motor, electric motor. You got a brake, and then a big drum with the cable wound over. And then the operator would sit there, and he would manually move it up, and the skips would go up and down, moving the coal. And they were balanced, so the only thing they were moving was the weight of the coal on one side. So if you had like 10 tons of coal or 20 tons of coal, you weren't moving all the equipment, the shaft, and the rope and everything, because the other side weighed exactly the same. Okay, so this is something innovative they did. This is later mining. So this entry here, this is the production shaft, and here's the tipple. This entry actually stopped right here on the original mine maps. And I was wondering why, but they came up with, if you're standing down there and looking back up toward the shaft, you see 4 coal cars full of coal waiting for the skips to come. So when they come down, there'll be a set of empties. They let the empties loose, and it's downhill, and they go into single file. And then they came up with this ingenious thing where they go up this big ramp, and they hit a bunch of paddles, and there's ropes all over the place. It's like a Rube Goldberg thing. And it throws some switches, and then those cars come back down, and they go down a side chute, which is this little chute here, and then they collect them over here and take them back in the coal mine. I mean, if I would have designed this, I would have had, used gravity also, but I would have had a set of entries where the empties would have gone in and you would have put them. But I think because, if you remember from the bottom of coal map, it's uphill going to the north. So you couldn't make that work because you'd want everything to flow downhill and around. So you'd have to rearrange it, and nobody would probably want to do that. But that was kind of interesting innovation. Okay, so the 1938 map shows the surface facilities, and you can see these long areas where they were dumping the refuse. Here's the town, here's the production shaft and the hoist, and we'll zoom in on that. Okay, so we know the coal went out to the north, up to the west side belt, I think the railroads come. So the empties were stored over on this side, the loadeds were put together and they formed a train on this side. You got the tipple here and the shaft, and then here's the hoist house. And this is the Montour Railroad running around the outside. This is South Park Road right there. And this is Main Street. Pretty sure that's Main Street, 1938. Okay, and here's a map of that same thing. I think it was 1935. And it shows the hoist house and the bathhouse, which, if you zoomed to today, are the only two buildings still left from there. Everything else has been knocked down and reclaimed. And this is the industrial park right over top of the old refuse area. And the facilities were right here. But this is the bathhouse. And it makes sense because it was in between the town and the shaft. So the miners would come out, they'd walk to the bathhouse, they'd take clothes, they'd leave their mine clothes here, then they'd walk over to their house. It's a pipe supply company, and then this is the hoist house. And they've added a little over here, and you can see the brickwork's the same. There would have been a big slot in this side where the wire ropes ran up to the top of the hoist. So that's all is for Bethel Park. So we're going to hit Horning real quick. Mine maps, they had some good mine maps. A lot of the Pittsburgh terminal mine maps are missing. The really, really detailed ones that the draftsman put together. But you can see here's mine number 4. Here's the railroad. Tipple was right here. Their power facilities were over here on the corner of Curry and Horning Road. And you can see, it looks a lot like the other ones. Aerial tram over the railroad, dumping the refuse here. Looks like they just dumped some refuse along the side of the road here because it was cheaper. And when you look at the mine map, you can see that's his stable. There were like 30 or 40 horses there. You probably also find a building that says blacksmith on it. So, but here's a machine shop, the boiler house, and the powerhouse. Okay, on the mine map, that's where the two buildings are. And aerial photo, you zoom in, you can see those buildings. The powerhouse are the ones with the smokestacks. And it must have been winter, and it must have been late in the day because you can see the shadow of the smokestacks on the ground. So this was the powerhouse, and the mechanics maintenance building was right here. There they are on a regular map. There they are on the aerial photo. And then here they are. It's the Bloom Engineering right on the corner. And right away you can see there's that brickwork. It's exactly the same. And you can look, yeah, it's in the right one. You look around the other side, and the mechanics shop is embedded back in there. So, okay, that's all the Pittsburgh terminal ones. I didn't really talk much about Castle Shannon. So, the 1922 Pittsburgh Coal Company map shows the mines that were there. Here's Harrison Mine that comes out of Bridgeville. Here's a Montour 4, which is in Thompsonville, or across the road on Valley Brook Road. And Library, Montour 10. Montour 8, which is over in Pleasant Hills, actually was a Lewis Run. It was behind the old Kmart, so which is now at home. Yeah. So, see, I haven't been here. I've only been here 40 years, but I'm starting to say behind the old stuff like everybody else. So. Somebody has penciled in the outline of the Coverdale property, which I thought was kind of interesting. Everything else belonged to Pittsburgh Coal Company. Okay, Montour 4. Montour 4, this is the mine map, and you can see how big Montour 4 is. This is Lawrence, This is South Point. Lick Run is up here, and this is Bridgeville up in here. So, I mean, it's a monster coal mine. And then aerial photo-wise, here's the town of Lawrence up on top. Right here was the initial production shaft. When you're going down Valley Brook and you go underneath that railroad, right there on the right side would have been the initial production shaft. And then the refuse was hauled out and dumped here along Chartiers Creek. Yeah, this is Lawrence right there. And then there's another facility on along Valley Brook Road, which later became a production shaft. And there were many variants there. There was the 1920s version. Then Consol put a slope in, and they put a belt in, and they did a bunch of stuff. Eventually, they took that coal and they took it over to Champion to wash it, back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So this is what it looks like today. You can see there's something still here on Valley Brook. There's a bunch of buildings here where the facilities used to be, and over where the refuse area is, they built a bunch of buildings, and the town's pretty much the same as it was in 1938. Okay, so this is what Valley Brook looked like, and you can see, guess what? There's your brickwork, the same stuff, and this was built around the same time period, and this is what it looks like today. It's the TAR self-storage lot on Valley Brook. That is the hoist house. There was a shaft on the other side of it, and there was all this facility here. And I'm pretty sure there must have been an aerial tram going over the hill, because if you go over to Hidden Valley Golf Club, there used to be a big refuse area there, and now they're building homes on it. That refuse had to have come from this mine. I just haven't figured out how they did it yet. So. And this is what Lawrence looked like in 1927. You got a big structure. This later became a supply slope, and you can see a supply slope. Here's a whole bunch of timbers they're going to take in the coal mine. So, but note behind this building is a big brick building, and here, same brickwork, another building. And there's that one building, and I know that good because my daughter took dance classes there for like a million years. And then here's the other building that you saw in there, and they added on to it because this isn't the same architecture. And if you turn around and look, there's a mine building sitting there back there somebody's using. So there's a lot of old mine buildings out there, and they're still being utilized. So. Okay, Montour 10 Lick Run. Lick Run was actually started by Keeling Coal Company in 1890. And it had the typical, this actually was a trestle. They went back to the hillside, and they had a slope, shallow slope. And here's the tipple. It looks like they were producing a couple of products. This is the powerhouse. And on the mine maps, you can see the powerhouse and the tipple and the mine openings. This is the top of the slope. This is the shaft, and that shaft's now sitting in the Broughton Fire Department parking lot, so underneath there. And interestingly enough, these tunnels right here and these facilities, that's Pittsburgh Terminal Number 6 mine. It was across the street from Lick Run mine. Of course, in 1899, it became Pittsburgh Coal Company. And here's a closer view. Here's the blacksmith shop. Here's the engine hoist, which would hoist the coal up the slope, and then it would run across the trestle to the tipple. And then here's the mine foreman's office right up on top here. I don't know, he probably didn't go in the coal mine that much. But, so on a map, there's where the boiler house looks like. On an aerial photo, there's something there. There's the one shaft. The slope, I actually used LiDAR, and the slope is now a V, where the slope had caved in, and all that material was sucked in the coal mine. And there's a V in the side of the hill there where the slope used to be. Okay, so here's the 1938. Everything's removed. Everything's gone except for half of this building. All the tracks are gone on both sides of the railroad. And there's the top of the slope, and there's half of the boiler building, and there's what it is, 1890, and it's a body shop. And I went and talked to the lady who owned it. They had no clue. They thought it was, wasn't that old, but it's actually in pretty good shape. And it's not like they took the building apart. They actually just took a sledgehammer to it and knocked the other building off. So you can actually see the toothpick. So I was up there climbing around. I climbed up the hillside. I was looking for some old stuff. There's actually supports for the old trestle are still on the hillside. So
You said that's 1890?
so that's that half of the building, of the power building of this picture, is still being used. But in 1920, they opened library. They opened up Montour 10. This is a shot of Montour 10 of a man trip looking back towards the library. There's libraries back here. This is one of the, that is one of the shops. And this is the Montour 10 building. Lick Run is up here. They mined down into here. Then Montour 10 mined this, then came across underneath the creek and continued to mine all this. That is where it meets number 8 Mine Coverdale right there. Okay, and here's one of the case sheets to zoom in. That area we were looking at, those man trips were sitting right on that curve, looking back at that shop, and it went underground and went up heading north. The preparation plant was actually down here, and the refuse would go across the road and up the hill. And if you ever go up, Cardox Road, there's all kinds of refuse and stuff. That's the refuse from Montour Town. So here's the 1938 aerial photo showing pretty much the same thing. You can see where this is Stewart Road right here, and that's Brownsville Extension. That's Pleasant Street, I think. And then 1956, the coal mine's still running. They closed down in 1970. 1993, coal mine is gone. This area has been reclaimed. This is Consols Research, where Doug worked for like a million years. And this is what it looks like in 2016, just before they sold it to Ryan Holmes, who did that. Who did that? They put in Summit Station, and Ron Stovesh's daughter lives in there, by the way. Ron Stovesh's daughter lives in there. Yeah, because he made me look and see if there was coal in there, a mine underneath their house, for free. For free. So. Okay.
You know, the original research building is still up.
Oh yeah.
That was built for
Yep.
it's still up.
Yep. The South Park Historical Society has the Montour Railroad Shipping Building. It's in the T parking lot, and they only open like a couple of days every month in the summer or something like that. But if you ever, they have a really nice mining. There's a lot of my stuff. My mine clothes are sitting on a mannequin there, and after I retired, I just threw them in the shed, and they still had mud and dirt on them from when I was. So you'll see what an actual coal mining outfit looks like. Okay, so this is, I put a bunch of these case sheets together. This actually starts at Chartiers Creek, runs up Painter's Run, and you can see there's 1, 2, at least 3 or 4 coal mines that come out in Painter's Run. I think this one was the Bridgeville mine, and then across the street was Essen, and then over here was, I actually saw a photograph in one of the other Historical Society books that said the Witch Mine, but on the mine map it says Witch Hazel Mine. And then the Harrison Mine is right up here between McMillan Road and Rob Hollow Road. And if you zoom in, you can see the railroads where the mines were. This is that tunnel. This is the corner of Bower Hill and Painter's Run. And if you're going north on Bower Hill, you'll see that tunnel sitting. That is a railroad tunnel. The railroad went through, and the other side is behind the 7-Eleven or something like that. I haven't crawled back there. My wife won't let me go back there. But and then here's another mine. This was the Essen mine, and then this was the Harrison mine. So you look at the mine map and you see the same thing. There's a powerhouse. There's some shafts. There's a tipple. And I haven't quite figured out how this works yet. I don't think coal actually came up here. I think they actually brought coal up a shaft or something because of the way to get into the tipple from looking at the photographs. And here it was in 1939. Everything is gone. You know, I've driven down that, you know, since the 80s, I've driven down Painter's Run and noticed that this is not natural. I mean, it's completely disturbed and stuff. And in the hillside, it used to be, before it grew up, you could see where the entries came out and the roof had collapsed in the entries. Some of the rock, at least I could, I mean. So here's the refuse area up on the hillside, and then here is the mine powerhouse. And there it is. The refuse area is now a field, sports field, and that is the Beedling Sports Club.
That's the Beedling soccer field.
Yeah. So here's an old map showing the powerhouse and the tipples over here. And then I took this like a couple weeks ago, and it was too sunny, and I was at a wrong angle. But you can kind of see where that building was. I should be higher up to try to get that. And then they added this front porch on, but this is the powerhouse for the Harrison mine. It's the only thing that's left. Okay, so on Painter's Run looking up, you see the tipple. Okay, and then in the parking lot of the Beedling Sports Club looking down, the tipple would have been right here on this corner. Okay, so as far as Bethel Park's concerned, you know, what are the impacts to historic mining? What are the hazards associated? Acid mine drainage, well, one thing, it's not really acid anymore. This stuff's been flowing for so long and everything's reacted that the water's mostly turned alkaline. There's a lot of high iron and they treat for iron, but it's really not acid mine drainage, it's just kind of mine drainage. Unreclaimed surface facility sites is very little impact. You know, Coverdale's covered up by the industrial park, and Molinar is pretty stable. But what there is mine subsidence. It's pretty common and it's unpredictable. And Bureau of Mines, they did a study before they shut down in the 80s, in 77, that showed subsidence in Allegheny County by year of mining. And you can see that it really peaks up between 1900 and 1930, which is pretty much when they mined Bethel Park. That's when the most amount of subsidence is in Allegheny County. So if you go to, there's a website called EMAP-PA, and it's an environmental map. The DEP maintains it, and you can turn on everything, mining stuff, oil and gas, and turn up. And this strange thing about mine subsidence is they don't give you the data. Nobody will let out the data of if something's subsided or not. The mine subsidence insurance company who sells you the mine subsidence insurance, they hold that stuff confidential. And I've tried to get it a couple times because it'd be nice to know if there's subsidence going on if I'm running a pipeline through the area. But no, they hold that dear. But what they do, the Bureau of Abandoned Mine in Evansburg tracks subsidence calls. So when you call and make a complaint, you know, they will put a pinpoint on it and then make a case. And then if you click on any one of those, you see in 2018, somebody in southern Bethel Park had a mine subsidence complaint. Now it was settled in 8 days, so you don't know if it was really mine subsidence or, you know, if it was a cracked foundation and stuff. But all those phones in Bethel Park and these areas are subsidence complaints. So there's a lot going on. I know specifically over on Gill Hole Road in Pleasant Hills, there's active subsidence going on. It's been going on in the parking lot of the Foodland and up there in some of the subdivisions. And it all depends on when it was mined and what type of mining and how much they left behind. Typically, if you leave 50% of the coal in the ground, it's going to protect the surface. Anything more, anything less, I mean, is going to eventually end up subsiding. You just don't know when. It's really erratic. So if you go Google mine subsidence insurance, if you live anywhere in Bethel Park, except for those 84 acres that was never mined theoretically, then you ought to look into mine subsidence insurance. You get $100,000 insurance for $25 a year. I mean, yeah, it cut in half. It was $50, but now it's $25. I think it's $28, and if you're over 65, it's $25. So I mean, it is like dirt cheap. I got it. I'm over Matthews. My daughter's over Montour 8, and my son's over Coverdale. We all got it, you know. Even though I looked at him, I'm thinking that, yeah, there's probably a good chance. I'm going to pay the $25. So that's it. That's it. That was the...
Over the good town, how many losses, if you would, do we have still at rest in the mines, if any?
How many what?
How many deceased hard-working coal miners?
I don't think there were any... Usually those happen when you get a catastrophe. You know, when something blows up and you get... I didn't hear of any. I bet there's a lot of dead horses and mules. People... So I don't really know. I don't really know, but I haven't really heard of it.
Okay.
Over on Broughton, going down towards Curry,
Yep.
that white building that now sits there, I stopped recently and I don't have the picture. There is a memorial plaque to, I want to say it's 26 lost coal miners.
Okay. Yeah. Horning had an accident. All these mines had accidents. You know. I mean, they were candles and flames on their head, and it's a gaseous. And coal, you know, methane explodes between 5% and 15%. It will explode. Coal dust will explode, and none of these. The regulations really didn't kick in until 1968, and that was because of Consol and their mine down in Farmington Number 9 mine, which was a huge explosion. After that, 68, then all the regs kicked in. So.
Yeah, I think Corning had an explosion, and I think that's when it closed, and I'm not sure the date.
No, they mined after that.
Did they?
Did they continue? Yeah.
Okay. Question?
You had a slide up there of the inspectors.
Yeah. Yep.
Was that a government inspector or a coal mine inspector?
That was a state inspector. State.
They-
Yeah, they and I don't, they then and that's all they did, inspect it, because I don't think they had any power to do anything. Just like the Bureau of Mines didn't have any power to do anything. So they went in, they looked at the mine, they wrote little reports. They said your ventilation's good and your drainage is good or it's bad. And sometimes they would make, but they didn't have the power to force them to do anything. And ventilation, good ventilation in 1900 is probably terrible. So I mean, you just enough to get, you know, so you could see the horse in front of you maybe, but the coal dust would have been terrible and the methane would have been terrible. So.
When I was a kid over here at Coverdale, there was a Red Dog pile.
Yep.
And to me, it seemed like it was a mountain. I don't know.
It was. I saw a picture of it from
Yeah,
there.
so what is Red Dog anyway?
Red Dog is burnt up coal refuse. And there's a lot of, in the slate, there's a lot of pyrite and a lot of iron, you know, which is iron sulfide. And what happens is when you get moisture involved, it will form a chemical reaction and it'll start heating. And a lot of this coal is older, so it really doesn't heat as bad. You can put a pile of coal out there and it'll sit there for a while if you compact it and keep the oxygen off it. But if you just throw the stuff out there and there's still coal involved, oxygen is going to get in, it's going to start, water is going to get in, it's going to chemical reaction. It will heat up enough to start itself on fire. If you go out west to some of the younger coals, and when they open a pit, the thing starts on fire right away. I mean, some of this stuff, Alabama has a coal seam that has a high oxygen content layer in it, and you mine it, and it'll start on fire the next day. Wow. So spontaneous combustion is a big problem. But that's what happens, because I mean, you look at any of these old refuse piles, and you'll see Red Dog, which is just burnt up slate.
Huh. Okay.
The number 5.
Yep.
Perry, I stopped down there at that motorcycle shop last week, and the guy Kenny owns that motorcycle shop. He owns that whole land.
Okay.
And I said, well, you know, there's a shaft back there. Oh, yeah, it's back there. And because we tried to break through that years ago. He's on that property for 40 years. It's a big piece of cement on there. We couldn't get through that because we were looking for a place to dump our old tires.
Oh.
So he said, it's back there. So he said, this put a bunch of debris on top of it.
Yep. Yeah, that's, I mean, and you look at that and you look at the aerial photos, why'd they even go back in there? I think what it was is, is originally they said they were gonna, these reserves are big enough for 10 coal mines. And but those were 1,900 coal mines, and you needed, didn't produce as much coal. So you need a smaller reserve block for each coal mine. So they laid all these out and they put them in, and then all of a sudden in the 20s they realized, oh, we can get a lot more coal out of here. We don't need that. We'll give that coal to 6 and let that run a longer time. And you notice 8 was the biggest mine because it was producing the most coal and they needed the most reserve. So.
Good. Well, 2 more questions. Go ahead, Richard.
Going back to Bethel Green and Red Dog Mountain, how did they form that? How did they haul the stuff up there?
It was an aerial tram. It was basically like a ski lift with little buckets hung on it. They're actually pretty good sized buckets. They would dump the refuse in, it would go up to the top, it would dump out, and then they'd put it in little rail cars. And they'd run track out, and they would take, because you see these fingers that kind of run out. They would take it and they would just end dump it over, and then as they got so far, they would extend the rail and just keep doing it then. So you can see it. You can see it on the aerial photo. Here, I can go back here.
Yeah, so are these mines filled with water?
Well, water runs through them, and probably the barriers between some of the coal mines is holding water back. But coal is the most porous thing out there, and it's been crushed on both sides and everything. So coal's really permeable. The sandstone, the shales and stuff, water doesn't flow through them good, but it flows through the coal. So if you have a barrier between Coverdale and Montour 10, you may get some water backing up, but it isn't going to back up high enough to come to the surface. Once it gets enough head on it, it'll force itself through that barrier and then continue on its way down to the Hahn treatment plant. So
It goes to Peters Township.
it goes to Peters. It goes to Peters, and then it sinks the middle school, and then it goes on.
So thank you everybody for coming. Thank you. We do have some artifacts. If you haven't saw anything that we have in our little museum, we have a donation box. There's some water. Thanks everybody for coming today.